Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded grocery store parking lot, her cart filled with weekly supplies. The autumn evening air was crisp in Denver, and she pulled her jacket as she approached her silver Civic. At 52, Sarah had learned to blend into crowds effortlessly. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were unremarkable. She preferred it this way. After spending 25 years in the shadows, anonymity had become her closest friend. She began loading groceries into her trunk when she heard raised voices nearby. 2 parking spaces over, a young woman was backing away from a tall man in military fatigues. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the Marine Corps insignia on his uniform. The woman, probably in her early 20s with long hair, was shaking her head and trying to move toward her car. "Come on, just give me your number," the Marine said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "I'm shipping out next week. What's the harm?" "I already told you no," the woman replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Please leave me alone." Sarah continued loading her groceries, but her trained eyes remained focused on the situation. The Marine stepped closer to the young woman, blocking her path to her car door. Sarah's muscles tensed instinctively. She had seen this scenario play out too many times during her years of service, both in foreign countries and on domestic bases. "Don't be like that," the Marine continued, his tone becoming more aggressive. "I'm serving my country, show a little respect." The young woman clutched her purse and took another step back, but she was now trapped between 2 cars. Sarah closed her trunk quietly and began walking in their direction, her movements casual but purposeful. Years of training had taught her to assess situations quickly and act decisively when necessary. "I appreciate your service," the young woman said, her voice stronger now but still shaking. "But I'm not interested. I need to go." The Marine laughed, a sound that made Sarah's jaw clench. "You're not going anywhere until we finish talking." He reached out and grabbed the woman's wrist. That was all Sarah needed to see. She approached them with measured steps, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Excuse me," she said in a clear, steady voice. "Is there a problem here?" The Marine turned, still holding the young woman's wrist. He was at least 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the confident swagger that came with military training. When he saw Sarah, his expression shifted to one of dismissive amusement. "Nothing that concerns you, lady," he said. "This is between me and my friend here." "I'm not your friend," the young woman said quickly, looking at Sarah with desperate eyes. "I don't know him." Sarah nodded calmly. "Then I suggest you let her go," she said to the Marine, her voice remaining level but carrying an undertone of authority that made both the Marine and the young woman look at her more closely. The Marine laughed again, tightening his grip on the woman's wrist. "Or what? You gonna call mall security?" He looked Sarah up and down dismissively. "Look, Grandma, I appreciate you wanting to help, but this doesn't involve you. Why don't you go finish your shopping?" Sarah took another step closer, her hands remaining at her sides but her posture shifting almost imperceptibly. Anyone with military training would have recognized the subtle change, the way her weight distributed evenly on both feet, the slight turn of her shoulders that suggested coiled readiness. "I'm asking you nicely," Sarah said, her voice still calm. "Let her go." The Marine's expression darkened. "And I'm telling you to mind your own business." He pulled the young woman closer to him, making her stumble. "Lisa here was just about to give me her number, weren't you, Lisa?" "No, I wasn't," Lisa said, trying to pull her wrist free. "Let me go." Sarah could see that the situation was escalating beyond words. The parking lot was surprisingly empty for a weekday evening, and there were no security guards in sight. She had 2 choices: walk away and hope someone else would intervene, or handle the situation herself. For Sarah, there was really no choice at all. "This is your last warning," Sarah said, taking one more step forward. "Release her now." The Marine's face twisted with anger. "You know what, lady? You're really starting to piss me off." He let go of Lisa's wrist, but immediately shoved her hard against the car behind her. Lisa cried out as her back hit the vehicle. "There, I let her go, happy now." Before Sarah could respond, the Marine turned his attention fully to her. "Now it's your turn to learn some manners." He moved toward Sarah with the confident stride of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation with a middle-aged woman. Sarah remained perfectly still until he was within arm's reach. When he raised his hand to grab her shoulder, everything changed in an instant. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Her left hand shot up to deflect his reaching arm while her right hand struck his wrist with precise force, causing him to stumble backward in surprise. The movement was so fast and fluid that both the Marine and Lisa barely saw what happened. "What the hell?" the Marine stammered, looking at his tingling wrist in confusion. "Walk away," Sarah said simply. "This doesn't have to go any further." The Marine's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "You think you're tough?" He squared his shoulders and moved toward her again, this time with clear intent to use force. "I've been trained to kill people, lady. You have no idea what you're messing with." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Actually," she said quietly, "I think I do." The Marine lunged forward, throwing a punch that would have easily connected with most people. But Sarah wasn't most people. She the punch with minimal effort, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him stumbling past her into the side of a parked car. The Marine hit the car with a loud thud and spun around, his eyes wide with shock. "How did you?" He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he came at her again, this time more cautiously but with greater determination. Sarah waited, her stance relaxed but ready. When he threw another punch, she blocked it easily and responded with a quick strike to his solar plexus that left him gasping for air. "Stop," Sarah said firmly. "You're embarrassing yourself." But the Marine's pride had been wounded, and that made him dangerous in a different way. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folding knife, flicking it open with practiced ease. "Now we're talking," he said, his breathing still labored. "Let's see how tough you are now." Lisa screamed and pressed herself against the car. Several other shoppers in the distance had noticed the commotion and were pulling out their phones, but no one was coming closer. Sarah's demeanor shifted slightly. The knife changed the dynamic entirely, and she could see in the Marine's eyes that he was beyond reasoning. Her years of training had prepared her for this moment, even though she had hoped never to need those skills again. "Put the knife down," Sarah said, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. "You're about to make a mistake you can't take back." The Marine advanced with the knife held low, the way someone with combat training would carry it. "The only mistake was you getting involved in something that wasn't your business." He moved faster this time, slashing upward with the blade. Sarah twisted away from the attack and grabbed his wrist with both hands, controlling the knife while simultaneously driving her knee up into his ribs. The Marine grunted in pain but held onto the weapon. They struggled for a moment, the Marine trying to break free while Sarah maintained control of his knife hand. To any observer, it would have looked like a dangerous situation for the older woman. But Sarah's grip was steel strong, and her positioning was perfect. With a sudden, explosive movement, Sarah twisted the Marine's wrist in a direction it wasn't meant to go. He cried out in pain and dropped the knife, which clattered across the asphalt. Before he could recover, Sarah swept his legs and sent him crashing to the ground. The Marine hit the pavement hard, his head bouncing once before he lay still, dazed and defeated. Sarah stood over him, not even breathing heavily, while Lisa stared in complete shock. "Stay down," Sarah told the Marine calmly. "The police are probably already on their way." Indeed, several people were now approaching cautiously, and she could hear sirens in the distance. Sarah looked at Lisa, who was still pressed against the car, her eyes wide with amazement and confusion. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked gently. Lisa shook her head slowly. "No, how did you do that? Who are you?" Sarah picked up the knife and closed it, slipping it into her pocket. "Just someone who doesn't like bullies," she said. The Marine groaned and tried to sit up, but Sarah placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "I wouldn't recommend it. You might have a concussion." "You broke my wrist," he mumbled, cradling his injured arm. "It's sprained, not broken," Sarah corrected. "You'll be fine in a few weeks." Two police cars pulled into the parking lot with lights flashing, followed quickly by an ambulance. Sarah remained calm as the officers approached, her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. "What happened here?" the first officer asked, looking between Sarah, the Marine on the ground, and Lisa. "This man was harassing this young woman," Sarah explained simply. "When I intervened, he became violent and pulled a knife. I defended myself and disarmed him." The officer looked skeptical as he took in the scene. A middle-aged woman standing unharmed next to a trained Marine who was lying on the ground with injuries. "Ma'am, are you sure that's what happened?" the officer asked. Lisa stepped forward immediately. "Yes, that's exactly what happened. He grabbed me and wouldn't let me leave. When this woman tried to help, he attacked her with a knife. She saved my life." Other witnesses who had gathered echoed Lisa's account, several having recorded parts of the confrontation on their phones. The officer's expression shifted from skepticism to professional interest. "And you are?" he asked Sarah. "Sarah Martinez," she replied, handing over her driver's license. "I live here in Denver." The paramedics were checking on the Marine, confirming that he had a sprained wrist, possible concussion, and several bruises but no serious injuries. As they worked, he kept staring at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and something approaching fear. "What's your name, son?" the officer asked the Marine. "Corporal Jake," he replied, still holding his injured wrist. "I'm stationed at Fort Carson." The officer nodded and began taking statements from everyone involved. As he worked, Sarah noticed that Lisa kept glancing at her with curious eyes, clearly wanting to ask more questions but not quite daring to. When the initial statements were complete, and the Marine had been arrested on charges of assault and harassment, the officer approached Sarah privately. "Ma'am, I have to ask," he said quietly, "what's your background, because what you did there, that wasn't luck." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I prefer to keep my past private, officer. Is that going to be a problem?" The officer studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "No, ma'am, you acted in self-defense and in defense of another person. As far as I'm concerned, you're a hero." As the police finished their work and began to disperse, Lisa approached Sarah hesitantly. "I never got to thank you properly," she said. "I'm Lisa, by the way." "You're welcome," Sarah replied. "I'm just glad you're safe." "Can I ask you something?" Lisa said, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "That wasn't normal what you did. I've never seen anyone move like that." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. "I used to work in security," she said finally, "a long time ago." Lisa nodded, clearly sensing that there was more to the story but respecting Sarah's privacy. "Well, whatever your background is, I'm grateful. I was really scared." "You handled yourself well," Sarah said. "You stayed calm and made smart choices. That's not easy when someone is threatening you." They exchanged phone numbers, and Lisa promised to call if she needed anything or if the case went to trial and she needed support. As the parking lot finally emptied and returned to normal, Sarah walked back to her car, her groceries still waiting in the cart. But as she drove home to her quiet apartment, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. For 27 years since leaving the Navy SEALs, she had lived a carefully constructed life of anonymity. She had become Sarah Martinez, the quiet woman who worked part-time at a local bookstore and kept to herself. But tonight, for the first time in decades, she had been forced to use the skills that had once made her one of the most elite soldiers in the world. And despite her best efforts to remain invisible, people had seen her. There would be questions, investigations, and attention that she had spent nearly 3 decades avoiding. As she pulled into her parking space at her apartment complex, Sarah realized that her carefully built life of anonymity might be coming to an end. The question was whether she was ready for people to discover the truth about who she really was and what she had spent 25 years of her life doing in service to her country. She sat in her car for a long moment, staring at her hands. These same hands had once handled weapons that most people never even knew existed. They had saved lives and taken them. They had performed missions that were so classified that even now, decades later, she could never speak about them. Tonight, those hands had been used to help an innocent woman and stop a dangerous situation. But Sarah knew that using her skills, even for good, was like lighting a flare in the darkness. Someone, somewhere, was bound to notice. And when they did, her quiet life as Sarah Martinez might be over forever. She gathered her groceries and walked toward her apartment, unaware that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. 3 days after the incident in the parking lot, Sarah was shelving books at used books when she noticed a man watching her from the philosophy section. He was tall and lean with graying hair at his temples, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive but not flashy. Something about his posture and the way his eyes tracked movement told Sarah he wasn't a typical customer browsing for weekend reading. Sarah continued her work, sliding worn copies of classic novels into their designated spaces while keeping the man in her peripheral vision. After 20 minutes, he approached the counter where she was processing returns. "Sarah Martinez?" he asked, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't quite place. "That's me," she replied evenly, looking up from the stack of books. Can I help you find something? The man reached into his jacket pocket and produced a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a federal badge. Agent David Reeves, Department of Defense. I was wondering if we could talk. Sarah's expression didn't change, but internally every alarm bell she possessed began ringing. She had been expecting this conversation for 27 years. I'm working right now, she said. Is this something that can wait until this evening? I'm afraid not, Reeves said, glancing around the quiet bookstore. It's about the incident 3 nights ago, the one with the Marine. Sarah's boss, an elderly man named Frank, looked up from his desk in the back office. Sarah, is everything all right? It's fine, Frank, Sarah called back. I need to take a short break. She looked at Agent Reeves. There's a coffee shop next door, 5 minutes. The coffee shop was nearly empty in the mid-afternoon lull. Sarah ordered a black coffee, while Reeves got something complicated with multiple shots of espresso. They sat at a corner table where they could speak privately. You put a Marine Corps corporal in the hospital, Reeves said without preamble. I defended myself and another person from an armed attacker, Sarah corrected. The police report should reflect that. Oh, it does, Reeves assured her. Very clearly, self-defense, protection of another person, model citizen behavior. That's not why I'm here. Sarah waited, her coffee growing cold between her hands. I'm here because Corporal has been trained in hand-to-hand combat by some of the best instructors in the Marine Corps, Reeves continued. He's 6'2", weighs 220, and has never lost a fight in his life. According to witnesses, you disabled him in under 2 minutes without breaking a sweat. Sometimes size doesn't matter, Sarah said. No, it doesn't, Reeves agreed. Especially when someone has been trained by the kind of people who don't officially exist. He leaned forward slightly. The kind of training that leaves very specific markers in how someone moves, how they assess threats, how they respond to violence. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, buying time to think. I don't know what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that Sarah Martinez, part-time bookstore employee, doesn't exist, Reeves said quietly. At least, not the way she should. I'm suggesting that whoever you really are, you've spent a lot of effort making sure no one can find out. People reinvent themselves all the time, Sarah said. It's not illegal. It's not, Reeves agreed, unless they're doing it to hide from people who need to find them. He pulled out a tablet and placed it on the table between them. Do you recognize this man? The photograph showed a man in his 50s with dark hair and intense eyes. Sarah studied the image for a moment, her expression revealing nothing. Should I? She asked. His name is Victor, Reeves said. Former Russian, current arms dealer and international criminal. 3 weeks ago, someone killed 6 of his men in Prague and stole something very valuable from him. What does this have to do with me? Reeves swiped to another photograph, this one showing a blurry security camera image of someone in dark clothing moving through what appeared to be a warehouse. The person who did this moved like a ghost. Professional, precise, lethal. The kind of person who could disappear for decades and then surface just long enough to complete a mission before vanishing again. Sarah's mind raced. She hadn't been to Prague in 15 years, and she certainly hadn't killed anyone recently. But someone was clearly trying to connect her to this incident, and that meant her carefully maintained cover was in serious jeopardy. Agent Reeves, she said carefully, I think you've made a mistake. I'm just a woman who works in a bookstore and knows a little self-defense. A little self-defense, Reeves repeated with a slight smile. Ms. Martinez, I've been tracking ghosts for 20 years. I know the difference between someone who took a few karate classes and someone who has been trained to kill with their bare hands. Before Sarah could respond, Reeves' phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression changed dramatically. We need to go, he said, standing abruptly. Now. I'm not going anywhere with you, Sarah said, remaining seated. 3 black SUVs just pulled up outside the bookstore, Reeves said urgently. They're not federal agents and they're not local police. If you want to stay alive, you'll come with me right now. Sarah glanced toward the window and saw what he was talking about. Men in dark clothing were exiting the vehicles with the kind of coordination that spoke of military training. Her instincts, honed by decades of dangerous situations, told her that Reeves was telling the truth. Back exit, she asked. Through the kitchen, Reeves said. I parked in the alley. They moved quickly through the coffee shop, past confused baristas, and into the narrow alley behind the building. Reeves led her to a nondescript sedan that looked like every other government vehicle she had ever seen. As they pulled out of the alley, Sarah could see armed men entering the bookstore. Frank was visible through the window, his hands raised in confusion and fear. "They won't hurt him," Reeves said, noticing her concern. "They're looking for you, not civilians." "Who are they?" "People, apparently. Someone told them you were responsible for what happened in Prague." Sarah processed this information as they drove through Denver traffic. Someone was using her as a scapegoat for a mission she hadn't been involved in. The question was who and why. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Safe house," Reeves replied. "We need to talk, and we need to do it somewhere they can't find us." The safe house turned out to be a modest ranch home in a suburban neighborhood. From the outside, it looked like any other family residence. Inside, however, Sarah could see the telltale signs of a government operation: reinforced windows, multiple communication systems, and sight lines that allowed observation of all approaches. "Sit," Reeves said, gesturing to a kitchen table. "We need to establish some ground truth here." Sarah remained standing. "First, I want to know who you really are and what you really want." Reeves nodded and pulled out a more detailed credential folder. "Agent David Reeves, Defense Intelligence Agency. I track former Special Operations personnel who have gone off the grid." "Why?" "Because sometimes they resurface in ways that threaten national security. Sometimes they're recruited by hostile intelligence services. Sometimes they go rogue." He looked at her meaningfully. "Sometimes they're framed for things they didn't do." Sarah finally sat down. "You think I'm being framed?" "I know you are. The timeline doesn't work. The Prague operation happened while you were working at the bookstore. I have security footage, time cards, and witness statements that place you in Denver during the entire week in question." "Then why come after me at all?" Reeves pulled out his tablet again and showed her a series of photographs. "Because someone has been very carefully building a case against you. Bank records showing payments from suspicious sources, even though those bank accounts don't actually belong to you. Hotel records in Prague under a false identity that happens to match one of your old cover names." Sarah's blood ran cold. Her cover names from her time in the SEALs were classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people had ever known them. "How would someone know about those identities?" she asked. "That's the question, isn't it?" Reeves said grimly. "Someone with very high clearance and access to old SEAL files has been setting you up. The question is why." Before Sarah could respond, Reeves' phone rang. He answered it with a sharp yes, and his expression grew darker as he listened. "How many?" he asked. "Then, are you certain?" "Finally, understood." He hung up and looked at Sarah with something approaching sympathy. "What?" she asked. "Frank is dead," Reeves said quietly. "Shot execution style in his bookstore 20 minutes ago." Sarah felt the familiar cold fury that she hadn't experienced in decades. Frank had been a kind man who had given her a job when she needed one, never asking too many questions about her past. He had died simply because he had been in the wrong place when dangerous people came looking for her. "They're escalating," she said, her voice deadly calm. "It gets worse. They took his computer and all his employment records. They now have your address, your references, everything you used to establish your identity here." Sarah stood and began packing, her mind shifting into tactical mode for the first time in 27 years. "They're not just trying to frame me for Prague. They're trying to flush me out, make me run so they can track me." "Or kill you," Reeves added. "Dead women don't contradict false evidence." "Who benefits from my being dead or discredited?" Sarah asked. "Anyone who was involved in the Prague operation and needs a scapegoat," Reeves said. "Anyone who wants to focus his revenge on someone other than them. Anyone who has a grudge against you from your time in the SEALs." Sarah stopped packing. "How much do you know about my service record?" "More than you'd probably like," Reeves admitted. "Sarah Martinez doesn't exist because she's not your real name. Your real name is Sarah, and you spent 25 years as one of the most highly classified operatives in U.S. military history." The name hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't heard her real name spoken aloud in decades. "You were part of a unit that officially never existed," Reeves continued. "Operations that were so sensitive that even most military leadership didn't know about them. The kind of work that creates both heroes and enemies." "That was a long time ago," Sarah said. "Not for everyone. Some people hold grudges for a very long time. Some people have been waiting decades for the right opportunity to settle old scores. Sarah's mind was racing through possibilities, old missions, former teammates, enemies who might have survived encounters that should have killed them. The list was longer than she wanted to admit. "I need to see the Prague files," she said. "Everything you have about the operation, the targets, the methods used." "Why?" "Because whoever did this knows how I work. The setup is too perfect, too specific to my particular skill set. They're not just framing me randomly, they're framing me because they know exactly how I would have conducted that operation if I had been the one doing it." Reeves considered this for a moment, then nodded. "That suggests someone who worked with you, someone who knew your methods intimately." "A teammate," Sarah said grimly. "Someone I trusted with my life." "Or someone you trained," Reeves added. "Someone who learned your techniques and is now using them against you." The possibility that one of her former students from her later years in the SEALs might be behind this was almost worse than the idea of a former teammate betraying her. She had trained dozens of operatives in her final years of service, passing on everything she had learned about staying alive in impossible situations. "I need that file," she said again. Reeves hesitated. "What I'm about to show you is classified at levels that technically don't exist. If you're really just Sarah Martinez, bookstore employee, then you have no business seeing any of it." "But I'm not, am I?" Sarah said. "We both know exactly who I am and what I used to do, so stop playing games and show me what happened in Prague." Reeves opened his tablet and pulled up a comprehensive file. 6 men dead, all professional killers. No witnesses, no evidence left behind except for some very specific tactical choices that match your old operational signature. Sarah studied the crime scene photographs and tactical analysis. Her heart sank as she recognized not just her general approach, but specific techniques that she had developed and taught to only a handful of people. "Rooftop infiltration through the skylight," she murmured, reading the report. "Pressure point strikes to disable sentries silently, use of the environment to create distractions and misdirection." "You recognize the work," Reeves observed. I invented most of these techniques." Sarah looked up from the tablet. "Whoever did this didn't just know how I work. They replicated my methods perfectly, too perfectly." "What do you mean?" "I mean this operation was performed by someone trying very hard to make it look like my work. But they made it too obvious, too textbook perfect. When I actually worked, I adapted my methods to each specific situation. This person followed the playbook exactly, like they were checking off items on a list." Sarah continued studying the files, her expert eye picking up details that others would miss. "There," she said, pointing to a photograph of one of the crime scenes. "See the way this guard was disabled? The angle of the strike, the precision of the force applied." Reeves looked where she was pointing. "What about it?" "It's perfect. Exactly the way I would teach someone to do it in a training environment. But in the field, you adapt. You use what works in that moment, in that position, with that particular target. This is too clean, too by the book." "So you're saying whoever did this learned your methods from training, not from working with you in the field?" "Exactly. This was done by a student, not a teammate. Someone who learned my techniques but never developed the instinct to adapt them." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She looked at it and her expression changed. "What?" Reeves asked. "It's from Lisa, the girl from the parking lot. She says men are at her apartment asking questions about me." Reeves was already moving toward his communication equipment. "They're expanding the search, looking for anyone who might have information about you." "She doesn't know anything," Sarah said. "She's innocent." "That won't matter to them. If they think she might have useful information, or if they think you might try to contact her, she's in danger." Sarah was quiet for a moment, weighing options and consequences. Finally, she looked at Reeves with an expression he hadn't seen before, the cold, determined look of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions. "Agent Reeves," she said, "I'm going to need my real identity back." "What do you mean?" "I mean Sarah Martinez, bookstore employee, is about to disappear forever. And Sarah, the woman they're really looking for, is about to remind everyone why she spent 25 years as the most feared operative in the U.S. military." Reeves studied her face and realized that the quiet, unassuming woman he had been talking to was gone. In her place was someone else entirely, Someone dangerous, professional, and completely focused. "What do you need?" he asked. "Everything: weapons, equipment, access to intelligence networks. And most importantly, I need you to understand that once we start down this path, there's no going back. Sarah Martinez dies today, and whatever comes next is going to be very different from the quiet life I've been living." Agent Reeves looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Welcome back, Sarah." 6 hours later, Sarah stood in the basement of the safe house, methodically checking equipment she hadn't touched in over 2 decades. Agent Reeves had delivered everything she requested: tactical gear, communications equipment, weapons, and most importantly, access to classified databases that would help her track down whoever was trying to destroy her life. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was Sarah Martinez, the quiet bookstore employee who wore simple clothes and kept her head down. In her place was a woman who moved with deadly precision, her eyes constantly scanning for threats, her mind processing tactical scenarios with machine-like efficiency. "The facial recognition software has been running for 3 hours, Reeves called from upstairs. "We're scanning every database we have access to, looking for anyone who matches the physical parameters of our Prague operative." Sarah finished attaching a knife sheath to her ankle and climbed the stairs. "Any hits?" 17 possibles, but I've narrowed it down to 3 based on the skill level required for the Prague operation." Reeves showed her 3 photographs on his tablet. All former U.S. military, all with advanced special operations training. Sarah studied the faces carefully. 2 she didn't recognize, but the third made her stop breathing for a moment. She said quietly, "You know him?" Sarah sat down heavily, the weight of recognition settling over her. "I trained him, 2008 to 2010. He was one of my last students before I retired." "Tell me about him." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, remembering. "Brilliant tactician, perfect physical conditioning, absolute dedication to the mission." She paused, "and completely ruthless when he needed to be." "Sounds like he was a good student." "He was too good, maybe." Sarah looked at Reeves. "Had a problem with authority. He followed orders, but he always thought he knew better than his superiors. I used to worry about what would happen when he got out of the military and didn't have the structure to keep him focused." Reeves pulled up service record. "Discharged in 2012. Dishonorable discharge for insubordination and assault on a superior officer." "That sounds right," Sarah continued reading. "What's he been doing since then?" "That's where it gets interesting. For 2 years after his discharge, nothing. No employment records, no address, no paper trail at all. Then suddenly in 2014, he surfaces as a private security contractor working in Eastern Europe." "Working for who?" "That's classified above my pay grade, but I can make some educated guesses. The kind of people who pay well for operators with no official connections to the U.S. military." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. "He went mercenary." "It looks that way. And if he's been working in that world for the past decade, he would have encountered people like, maybe even worked for him. Which means he knows exactly how thinks and operates." Sarah stood and began packing. "This isn't just about framing me for Prague, knows that will come after me personally. He's using as his weapon." "But why? What does he gain from your death?" Sarah was quiet for several minutes, thinking through the implications. "Revenge," she said finally, "but not for anything recent. This goes back to his time in training." "What happened?" "Was brilliant, but he had no sense of limits. He would take unnecessary risks, endanger his team, ignore protocols when he thought he knew better. I tried to train it out of him, but—" Sarah shook her head. "There was an incident during a training exercise, disobeyed direct orders and nearly got 3 other trainees killed. And I recommended that he be removed from the program. He blamed me for destroying his career, said I was jealous of his abilities." Sarah looked at Reeves. "Apparently, he's been planning his revenge for 15 years. Reeves' phone buzzed with an urgent message. He read it quickly and his expression darkened. "We have a problem. Lisa is missing." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. "When?" 2 hours ago. Her apartment was ransacked. Neighbors heard shouting and what sounded like a struggle, but by the time police arrived, she was gone." "People—" "Almost certainly, and if they have her, they'll use her to draw you out." Sarah was already moving toward the equipment room. "Then we're going to get her back." "Wait," Reeves said, following her. This could be exactly what they want, you walking into a trap. Maybe, but I'm not leaving an innocent woman to die because someone has a grudge against me. Sarah began loading magazines and checking weapons. Besides, if he's behind this, I know how he thinks. He'll want to face me personally. What do you mean? Always had an ego problem. He won't be satisfied with just having me killed by thugs. He'll want to prove that he's better than I am, that he's surpassed his teacher. Sarah clipped a radio to her vest. Which means he'll arrange for a confrontation where he can defeat me publicly. That's a big assumption. It's not an assumption. It's how his mind works. I trained him, remember? I know his psychological profile as well as his tactical abilities. Sarah finished her equipment check and turned to face Reeves. I need you to track any unusual activity in the city. Warehouse rentals, abandoned buildings, anywhere that would provide privacy for the kind of confrontation is planning. What are you going to do? I'm going to give him what he wants, a face-to-face meeting. Sarah checked her watch. But first, I need to make a phone call. She pulled out an encrypted satellite phone that Reeves had provided and dialed a number from memory. The call was answered on the second ring. Bishop, a gruff voice said. It's Sarah said, I need a favor. There was a long pause. Sarah, Jesus, I thought you were dead. It's been, what, 15 years? 27. Listen, Tom, I don't have much time. I need you to patch me through to Admiral Harrison. Harrison retired 8 years ago. He's dead, Sarah, heart attack. Sarah closed her eyes. Admiral Harrison had been her commanding officer during her final years in the SEALs, one of the few people who had known the full extent of her service record. Who replaced him? She asked. Admiral Martinez. No relation to your cover name, just coincidence. But Sarah, she doesn't know about your unit. That information was compartmentalized after Harrison died. Then I need you to brief her. Right now, everything. I can't do that without authorization. Tom, there are people using my old operational methods to frame me for a terrorist attack in Prague. An innocent woman has been kidnapped because of her connection to me. And somewhere out there, one of my former students has gone rogue and is using international arms dealers to settle a personal grudge. Bishop was quiet for a moment. How bad is this? Bad enough that I had to come out of retirement, and you know what that means. Christ, all right, I'll make the call, but Sarah, be careful. The world has changed since you disappeared. There are players now who make your old enemies look like amateurs. I know, that's why I need official support for this. You'll have it. Harrison always said you were the best operative he ever worked with. I'll make sure Martinez understands what's at stake. Sarah ended the call and looked at Reeves. Now we wait for them to make contact. They didn't have to wait long. Sarah's phone rang 20 minutes later with a number she didn't recognize. Answer it, Reeves said, activating recording equipment. But don't commit to anything. Sarah picked up the call. Hello. Hello, teacher, a voice said. Sarah recognized immediately, though his voice had changed over the years. It was colder now, with an edge of cruelty that hadn't been there during his training. I was wondering when you'd call. Were you? I was hoping I'd catch you by surprise. But I suppose old habits die hard. You always were one step ahead of everyone else. Not everyone, apparently. You've been busy. Laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. I've been planning. Do you know how long I've been waiting for this opportunity? 15 years, I'd guess, ever since I had you removed from the program. 15 years of watching inferior operators get missions that should have been mine. 15 years of working for people who couldn't appreciate true excellence. 15 years of dreaming about the day I could prove that I'm everything you never let me become. And now you're working with arms dealers and kidnapping innocent women to settle a score. That's not excellence, that's pathetic. Is it? Tell me, teacher, how does it feel to know that everything you built, everything you worked for is crumbling around you? Your cover identity is blown, your quiet life is destroyed, and an innocent woman is going to die because of your choices. Sarah felt Reeves' hand on her shoulder, reminding her to stay calm. What do you want? I want what I've always wanted. A chance to show you that the student has surpassed the master. Tonight, Warehouse District, Pier 47. Come alone, and I'll let the girl live long enough to watch our reunion. And if I don't come, then she dies slowly, and I send pieces of her to every news outlet in the country, along with evidence that you killed 6 men in Prague. Either way, your old life is over. The question is whether you want her death on your conscience, too. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone for a moment, then looked at Reeves. Pier 47, she said. Warehouse District. Reeves was already pulling up maps on his tablet. I know the area. Mostly abandoned, lots of places to set up ambushes or surveillance. Won't set up an ambush, not in the traditional sense. He wants to face me to prove he's better, but he'll have backup, insurance in case things don't go according to plan. Smen probably would promise them that I'd show up to rescue Lisa and they'd get their revenge for Prague, but wouldn't trust them to handle me alone. He knows what I'm capable of. Sarah began checking her equipment one final time. There's something else. Said he'd let Lisa live long enough to watch our reunion. That means he's planning to kill her regardless of the outcome. Unless you kill him first. That's the plan. Sarah looked at Reeves. I'm going to need backup, but they have to stay far enough away that doesn't detect them. If he thinks this isn't a fair fight, he'll kill Lisa immediately. What do you need? Sniper support, at least half a mile out with a clear line of sight to the warehouse, and a tactical team standing by but not moving in until I give the signal. Reeves nodded. I can make that happen, but Sarah, if this goes wrong. It won't go wrong, Sarah said with absolute conviction. I trained, which means I know his strengths and his weaknesses, and his biggest weakness was always his ego. He needs to prove he's better than me, which means he'll fight fair until he starts losing. That's when he'll become desperate and make mistakes. And if he's learned to control his ego in the past 15 years. Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then I guess we'll find out just how good a teacher I really was. As Sarah prepared to leave for what might be her final confrontation, she thought about the life she was leaving behind. Sarah Martinez had been quiet, peaceful, unremarkable. She had worked in a bookstore, paid her taxes, and bothered no one. That woman was gone forever, replaced by someone who had spent 2.5 decades learning to kill in service of her country. But as she loaded the last magazine into her weapon, Sarah realized that she wasn't mourning the loss of her quiet life. For the first time in 27 years, she felt completely alive. The skills she had tried so hard to forget, the instincts she had suppressed, the part of herself she had buried, it was all coming back, and it felt like coming home. Ready? Reeves asked. Sarah, former Navy SEAL, and one of the most deadly operatives in U.S. military history, looked at him with eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. I was born ready, she said. The warehouse district at midnight was a maze of shadows and abandoned dreams. Sarah moved through the darkness like she had never left the field, every sense alert, every muscle ready for action. She had approached from the east, using the cover of rusted shipping containers and broken-down vehicles to mask her movement toward Pier 47. Through her night vision scope, she could see the warehouse clearly. 2 men with automatic weapons stood guard outside the main entrance. Russian tattoos visible on their necks marked them as people. They were professionals, but they were expecting a middle-aged woman, not the ghost of America's most elite operative. Sarah's earpiece crackled with Agent Reeves' voice. Sniper team reports 2 additional hostiles on the roof, and thermal imaging shows at least 4 more inside the building. Copy, Sarah whispered. Any sign of the hostages? Negative. They're keeping them away from the windows. Sarah knew that Lisa was alive, would need her as leverage until the very end. But she also knew that time was running out, had always been impatient when he thought he had the upper hand. She circled the building once more, noting security positions and escape routes. The warehouse had been chosen well, multiple entrances and exits, clear sight lines, and enough space inside for the kind of dramatic confrontation that's ego demanded. But had made one crucial mistake. He had chosen a location that Sarah had used for training exercises 15 years ago. She knew every beam, every corner, every potential advantage the building offered. And more importantly, she had trained in this exact warehouse. He would expect her to remember the layout, but he wouldn't realize that her knowledge went far deeper than his. Sarah moved to the south wall where she knew a ventilation grate provided access to the building's basement. The lock had been changed, but that was a minor inconvenience for someone with her skills. Within minutes, she was inside the building, moving through the lower level toward the main floor. She could hear voices above her Russian accents discussing patrol routes and timing. Was being smart, using men for the mundane security work while keeping himself free to focus on the main event. Sarah reached a maintenance ladder that would bring her up behind the main support pillars of the warehouse. As she climbed, she could hear a familiar voice echoing through the space above. "She'll come," was saying. Sarah never could resist playing the hero. It's her greatest weakness. "And if she doesn't?" The voice that responded had a heavy Russian accent, probably one of lieutenant's. "She will, trust me, I know how she thinks. She trained me, remember." Sarah reached the top of the ladder and carefully lifted the floor panel that would give her access to the main warehouse floor. Through the gap, she could see the central area had been cleared to create an open space about 50 feet square. Industrial lights had been set up to illuminate the area like an arena. In the center of this space, Lisa was tied to a chair, her head hanging forward but moving slightly alive then. Around the perimeter, she counted 6 men with weapons, and standing with his back to her, wearing black tactical gear that looked expensive and professional, was. He had changed dramatically since she had last seen him. Where once he had been young and eager, now he carried himself with the cold confidence of someone who had killed many times. His hair was shorter, his frame more muscled, and when he turned slightly, she could see scars on his face that spoke of violent encounters survived. "She's here," said suddenly, and Sarah realized he wasn't talking to the Russians. "I can feel you watching me, teacher," he called out, his voice carrying easily through the warehouse. "Still using the old infiltration routes, I see. Some habits never change." Sarah remained motionless, was guessing, trying to provoke a response that would give away her position. "The girl is unharmed," continued. "For now, but she won't stay that way if you keep skulking in the shadows. I thought we'd raised you better than that at." Sarah made her decision. Staying hidden would only give time to position his people more advantageously, and Lisa was clearly in immediate danger if this dragged on too long. She stood up behind the support pillar and stepped into the light. "Hello," turned with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "There she is, the great Sarah. You look older." "You look disappointed," Sarah replied, walking slowly toward the center of the arena. "Did you expect me to come in shooting? That was never my style." "No, your style was always to play by the rules. Honor the mission, protect the innocent, follow orders. It made you predictable." Sarah stopped about 20 feet away from, close enough to talk without shouting but far enough to react to sudden movements. "Is that what you think? That following rules made me weak." "Didn't it? Look where it got you. Hiding in a bookstore for 30 years while operators like me shaped the real world." "Operators like you," Sarah repeated. "Working for arms dealers and kidnapping innocent women. Is that what you call shaping the world?" Smile faltered slightly. "I do what needs to be done, without the constraints that held you back." "Without conscience, you mean?" "Without weakness," gestured to his men, who raised their weapons slightly but didn't aim them directly at Sarah yet. "Did you really think you could walk in here and simply take her? You're outnumbered and 30 years past your prime." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but I'm not dead yet." "No, but you will be, right after you watch me kill your little friend here." Drew a pistol and pointed it at Lisa's head. "Unless, of course, you want to make this interesting." "What do you have in mind?" "Single combat, you and me, no weapons, no backup, just to see who really is the better operative." Sarah looked around at the armed men surrounding them, and them. "They're just here to make sure you don't try any heroics if you start losing. This is between us, teacher." Sarah nodded slowly. "All right, but when I win, the girl goes free and your men don't interfere." "When you win," laughed. "You really think you can beat me? I'm 20 years younger, in perfect physical condition, and I've been in active combat for the past decade while you've been shelving books." "There's only one way to find out." Holstered his pistol and began removing his tactical vest. "You know, I used to dream about this moment, the day I could finally prove that I was everything you said I could never be." Sarah removed her own equipment, keeping only her knife in its ankle sheath. She noticed had kept his knife as well. Fair enough. "You were one of my best students," Sarah said as they both prepared. "But you never learned the most important lesson." "Which was?" "That skill without wisdom is just violence waiting to happen." Moved first, coming at her with a combination of strikes that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Sarah had been fighting before was born. She deflected his attacks and countered with precision strikes that made him stumble back. "Not bad," said, circling her now, "but you're telegraphing your moves, age catching up with you." He attacked again, this time with more calculated movements. Sarah could see that he had indeed improved dramatically since his training days. His technique was flawless, his timing perfect. But as they exchanged blows, she began to see the pattern she had been expecting. Was fighting like he was in a training exercise. Every move was textbook perfect, executed exactly as she had taught him years ago. He had become stronger and faster, but he hadn't evolved. He was still the same student, just with more experience. Sarah began to change her style, using techniques that had never learned, movements from her years of actual field work that she had never taught to anyone. Suddenly was the one struggling to keep up. "What?" stumbled as Sarah swept his legs and simultaneously struck his shoulder, sending him crashing into a support pillar. "That's the difference between theory and practice," Sarah said as picked himself up. "You learn to fight in a classroom. I learned to fight in wars." His face twisted with rage. "You think you're so much better than me. You think your outdated techniques can match my years of real combat experience." He came at her again, this time abandoning technique for raw aggression. Sarah used his anger against him, redirecting his force and letting his momentum carry him past her while she struck vulnerable points. But was younger and stronger, and even making mistakes, he was a dangerous opponent. One of his wild swings connected with Sarah's ribs, sending her staggering. Another caught her shoulder, numbing her left arm. "Still think you're better?" panted, pressing his advantage. Sarah didn't answer. She had learned something important from the exchange. His real combat experience had made him overconfident in his ability to absorb punishment. He was taking hits that he should have avoided, trusting in his youth and conditioning to carry him through. She began targeting pressure points that would affect his mobility without obvious immediate damage. As they continued to fight, gradually began to slow down. His left leg wasn't responding quite right. His right arm was losing strength. "What are you doing to me?" demanded as he found himself increasingly unable to match Sarah's speed. "Teaching you a final lesson," Sarah replied, landing a series of strikes that sent to his knees. She stood over him, not even breathing heavily. "You never learned patience. You always wanted to win quickly, dramatically. But real combat isn't about winning quickly. It's about outlasting your opponent." Looked up at her with hatred in his eyes. "Kill me then. Prove that you're everything I could never be." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "No, because unlike you, I don't kill people to satisfy my ego." She turned away from him to check on Lisa, which was exactly what had been waiting for. He pulled his knife and lunged at Sarah's back with a killing stroke. But Sarah had been expecting this. Without turning around, she the attack, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to drive the knife into his chest. Looked down at the blade protruding from his body with surprise, and something that might have been respect. "How?" he whispered. "Because I know you. I knew exactly what you would do the moment you thought you had lost." Sarah helped him sit down against a support pillar. "You never could accept defeat gracefully." "The Russians," gasped. "They won't honor our agreement. They'll kill you both." Sarah looked around at his men, who were raising their weapons with obvious intent to finish what had started. "I wouldn't count on that," she said calmly. Suddenly, the warehouse windows exploded inward as Agent Reeves' tactical team made their entrance. The Russians, caught completely off guard, found themselves facing a squad of federal agents with military-grade equipment and overwhelming firepower. The firefight was brief and one-sided. Within minutes, the surviving Russians were in custody, and Sarah was cutting Lisa free from her restraints. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked gently. Lisa shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was going to die." "It's over now," Sarah assured her. "You're safe." As paramedics worked on wounds, Agent Reeves approached Sarah. "How did you know he would try to backstab you?" Reeves asked. "Because that's who he was," Sarah replied, watching as was loaded onto a stretcher. "He never learned that sometimes winning isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes it's about understanding people better than they understand themselves." "What happens now?" Sarah looked around at the warehouse, at the federal agents processing the crime scene, at the life she had tried so hard to leave behind. "Now Sarah Martinez is officially dead," she said. And I guess I have to figure out who Sarah is going to be in a world that's moved on without her. As they left the warehouse district, Sarah realized that for the first time in 30 years, she had no idea what came next. But for the first time in just as long, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. The quiet life was over. The question now was what kind of life would take its place. 6 months after the warehouse confrontation, Sarah sat in a small in Washington, D.C., waiting for a meeting that would determine the course of her future. The quiet life of Sarah Martinez was indeed gone forever, but what had emerged in its place was something she had never expected. The Department of Defense had offered her a consulting position, working with Agent Reeves to track down other former operatives who had gone rogue. It was a chance to use her skills for good while staying within the bounds of law and order. But it also meant accepting that she would never again have the anonymity she had treasured for so long. A woman in a Navy uniform approached her table. "Ms., I'm Admiral Martinez." Sarah stood and shook her hand. "Admiral, thank you for meeting with me." Admiral Martinez was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in her early 50s, with graying hair and the kind of steady gaze that spoke of someone who had seen combat. As they sat down, Sarah could see that the Admiral was studying her with professional interest. "I've been reading your file," Admiral Martinez said. "What I can access of it anyway. Most of your missions are still classified above my clearance level." "That was a long time ago," Sarah replied. "Not that long, apparently. Agent Reeves' report on the incident makes for fascinating reading. A 52-year-old retired operative taking down a squad of international criminals and a rogue former SEAL." The Admiral leaned forward. "That's not the kind of skill that fades with age." "What do you want to know?" "I want to know if you're ready to come back, officially this time." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Over the past 6 months, she had been doing exactly what the Admiral was suggesting, working with Reeves to identify and neutralize threats from former U.S. operatives who had turned mercenary. The work was satisfying in a way that shelving books had never been. "The world has changed since I retired," Sarah said. "New threats, new technologies, new ways of fighting. But the fundamentals remain the same. Training, discipline, judgment under pressure. Those don't change." Admiral Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of photographs. "These are current threats that we're tracking, former military personnel who have sold their skills to the highest bidder." Sarah recognized some of the faces, people she had worked with, or trained herself over the years. "How many?" "We estimate at least 200 active cases worldwide. Some are working for foreign intelligence services, others for criminal organizations, some have simply become guns for hire. The problem is getting worse." "And you want me to help stop them?" "I want you to lead the effort. Your knowledge of special operations personnel and methods is unmatched. And as the case demonstrated, you're still capable of handling yourself in the field when necessary." Sarah studied the photographs more carefully. Some of these people had been her friends once, her teammates, her students. The idea of hunting them down was both appealing and troubling. "There's something else," Admiral Martinez continued. "Intelligence suggests that some of these rogue operators are being coordinated by a central organization. Someone is recruiting our former people systematically, building what amounts to a private army of ex-special forces." "Any idea who?" "That's what we need you to find out." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled slightly. "Excuse me," she said to the Admiral. "I need to take this." The message was from Lisa. "Coffee later, I have news to share." Over the past 6 months, Sarah had maintained contact with Lisa, partly out of protective instinct and partly because she had grown genuinely fond of the young woman. Lisa had shown remarkable resilience in recovering from her ordeal, and her gratitude had evolved into a genuine friendship. Sarah typed back, "Can't today, work meeting tomorrow." The response came immediately. "It's about work. I think you'll want to hear this." Sarah looked up at Admiral Martinez, who was watching her with patient curiosity. "Admiral, would you mind if a friend joined us? She might have information relevant to what we're discussing." "What kind of information?" "I'm not sure yet, but Lisa has good instincts, and she's been keeping her eyes open for anything unusual since the incident." Admiral Martinez nodded. "Of course." 20 minutes later, Lisa arrived at the looking excited and slightly nervous. She had changed since the kidnapping, carrying herself with more confidence and awareness of her surroundings. Sarah had given her some basic training in situational awareness, partly to help her feel more secure, and partly because Lisa had asked for it. "Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt," Lisa said as she sat down, "but I think I found something you need to know about." Sarah introduced Lisa to Admiral Martinez, explaining their connection without going into classified details about the warehouse incident. "What did you find?" Sarah asked. "You know how you taught me to pay attention to patterns, to notice when things don't fit," Lisa said. "Well, I've been working at a new job, doing data analysis for a consulting firm downtown, and I've been noticing some weird patterns in the hearing data." Admiral Martinez leaned forward with interest. "What kind of patterns?" "My company has been contracted to do background checks and skills assessments for what they call private security consulting. But the people being hired all have very specific backgrounds, former military, special operations, combat experience. And they're all being placed with different companies around the world, but the contracts all trace back to the same shell corporation." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. "How many people are we talking about?" "Over the past 2 years? At least 300, maybe more. And here's the weird part. A lot of them are people who left the military under questionable circumstances. Disciplinary problems, discharge disputes, that kind of thing." Admiral Martinez and Sarah exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of systematic recruitment they had been discussing. "Do you have names?" Admiral Martinez asked. Lisa pulled out her laptop. "I brought a list. I hope that's okay. I know this might be sensitive, but after what happened to me, I figure anything that might help stop people like is worth sharing." She opened a spreadsheet with hundreds of entries. Sarah began scanning the names and felt her blood run cold. She recognized at least 50 of them personally, former students, teammates, people she had worked with over her 25-year career. "This is it," she told Admiral Martinez. "This is the organization you were talking about." "Can you identify the people behind the Shell Corporation?" Admiral Martinez asked Lisa. "That's the tricky part. It's layers within layers, but I've been tracking the money trail in my spare time." Lisa pulled up another screen. "The ultimate funding seems to come from a consortium of international arms dealers and private military contractors." "Including?" Sarah asked. "His name appears several times, yes, but there are others too. American, European, Asian. It's like they've formed some kind of alliance." Admiral Martinez was taking notes rapidly. "This is exactly what we needed. Ms., would you be willing to work with us officially on this investigation?" "You mean like consulting?" "I mean like a full-time position with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Your analytical skills and your access to private sector data could be invaluable." Lisa looked at Sarah with surprise and excitement. "Is that something I could actually do?" "With the right clearance and training," Admiral Martinez confirmed. "We need people who understand how private corporations operate and how to track money through complex international networks." Sarah felt a strange sense of completion as she watched Lisa consider the offer. The young woman who had been a random victim 6 months ago was now potentially becoming part of the solution to a much larger problem. "I'll do it," Lisa said finally, "but I have one condition." "What's that?" Admiral Martinez asked. "I want to work with Sarah. I know I have a lot to learn, but she's the one who taught me to see patterns in the first place, and after everything we've been through together." "I think that can be arranged," Admiral Martinez said, looking at Sarah. "Assuming, of course, that Ms. accepts my offer as well." Sarah looked around at the normal people living their normal lives, unaware of the threats being discussed at their table. For 30 years, she had protected that normalcy from the shadows, first as an active operative and then simply by staying out of the way. But staying out of the way wasn't enough anymore. The world had become more dangerous, and the people who should have been protecting it were instead selling their skills to the highest bidder. Someone needed to stop them, and Sarah was uniquely qualified to do so. "There's one thing I need to know," Sarah said to Admiral Martinez. "When I find these people, what are my rules of engagement?" "Bring them in alive if possible, but if they resist arrest, if they threaten innocent lives, if they pose an immediate danger to national security." Admiral Martinez met Sarah's eyes steadily. "Then you do whatever is necessary to stop them." Sarah nodded. It was the answer she had been hopping for: clear authority to act, but with appropriate constraints. She wouldn't be an assassin, but she wouldn't be helpless either. "All right," Sarah said, "I'm in." "Excellent." Admiral Martinez stood and shook hands with both women. "Welcome back to the fight, Ms., and welcome to the team, Ms." As the Admiral left, Sarah and Lisa sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what they had just committed to. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked. "It's going to be dangerous. The people we're going after won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way." "I'm sure," Lisa said firmly. "6 months ago, I was a victim, someone who needed to be rescued. I don't want to be that person anymore. And if we have to face people like again." Lisa smiled, and Sarah could see something of her own determination reflected there. "Then I guess they'd better hope they don't underestimate us the way he did." Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in decades. "You know, I think this is going to be interesting." "Interesting?" "For 30 years, I've been Sarah, the lone wolf, the ghost in the shadows. But maybe it's time to try being part of a team again." As they left the together, Sarah realized that her story wasn't ending, it was beginning again. The quiet life was gone forever, but in its place was something better. A chance to use her skills alongside someone she cared about, in service of something larger than herself. The woman who had spent 25 years as an elite Navy SEAL, then 27 years hiding from that past, was finally ready to become whoever she was meant to be next. And for the first time since she could remember, Sarah was looking forward to finding out who that person would be. Behind them, the normal world continued its normal routines, blissfully unaware that 2 of its most unlikely guardians had just committed to keeping it safe. But that was exactly the way Sarah preferred it. The best protection was the kind that people never noticed, provided by people they would never suspect. She had been that kind of guardian before. Now she was ready to be one again, with a partner who understood that some fights were worth having and some prices were worth paying. The Marine who had attacked Lisa in that parking lot 6 months ago had unknowingly set in motion events that would make the world a safer place. It was, Sarah reflected, probably the most useful thing Corporal had ever done in his military career. But that was ancient history now. The future was waiting, and Sarah was ready for whatever it might bring.